One of the skills that you need to be able to solve a rational equation is to identify the least common denominator of a set of fractions. The least common denominator, denoted LCD, of a set of fractions is the smallest expression that each denominator divides into. The smallest expression that each denominator divides into. So here are some examples. If I'm going to define the LCD of 2 and 4, I need to find the smallest number that both 2 and 4 divide. 2 and 4 both divide into the number 4, right? So the LCD of 2 and 4 is 4. Now, maybe you had said 8. 8 is a common denominator, it's just not the least common denominator. The least common denominator of 6 and 9 is to find the smallest number that both 6 and 9 divide into. One way you can do it if you can't see it right off is to think about, well, what are the multiples of 6? 6 times 1 is 6, 6 times 2 is 12, 6 times 3 is 18, times 4 is 24. The multiples of 9, 9 times 1 is 9, 9 times 2 is 18, 9 times 3 is 27, and so on. And the smallest number that appears in both of those lists is the least common denominator. That's also referred to as the least common multiple of those numbers. So the least common denominator of 6 and 9 is 18. To find the least common denominator of fractions whose denominators are 15, 50, and 24, this one's a little bit more involved, and so another way to do it is to actually look at the factors of each of those numbers. If we factor 15, 15 is 3 times 5. 50 is 5 times 10, but then we can factor 10 further to be 2 times 5. And 24 is 4 times 6. But factoring each of those factors further gives us 2 times 2 times 2 times 3. And so when we want to find the least common denominator, we need a number that each of those numbers divide into. So that means that we can actually construct the LCD in this way. We need all of the factors for 15, so we'll need a 3 times a 5. Then we need all of the factors of 50. The factors of 50 are comprised of 2 times 5 times 5. So we need to bring in one of those factors of 2. We already have one factor of 5, so we need another factor of 5. And then for 24 to divide into it, we need 3 factors of 2 and a factor of 3. We have the 3 taken care of. We have one factor of 2, so now we need the 2 factors of 2. So when all is said and done, you should see the factors of each of these numbers within this LCD. Like the factors of 15, there's a 3 and 5. The factors of 50 are 2 5s and a 2. The factors of 26 are the 3 2s rather, and the 3. Then we multiply those values together to get what the LCD is, which is 600. Now we will extend this concept to the LCD of algebraic fractions. An algebraic fraction, or also called rational expression, is a fraction that contains a variable in the denominator. This is where the factoring that we were doing in the last section and as a review of this section will help prepare you to do these types of problems. So the steps to find the LCD, we have to factor each denominator completely if needed. And the least common denominator is a product of the factors from each denominator, excluding any factors that are included from the other denominators. So let's look at some examples of this. We want to find the least common denominator of the described fractions. So ones with fractions whose denominators are x and 2x. If we look at the factorization of each of those denominators, x is as simple as it gets. 2x is simply 2 times x, so the least common denominator is built from those factors. We need an x for the first denominator, and the second denominator we need a 2 times an x. We already have the included x, so the LCD is simply 2x. To find the LCD of fractions whose denominators are 4c minus 12 and 5c minus 15, we have to factor each of those denominators. 4c minus 12 has a common factor of 4, so that's 4 times c minus 3. 5c minus 15 is 5 times c minus 3. We can factor 4 further to really be 2 times c minus 3. So the LCD is comprised of these different factors. We need a 2 times 2 times c minus 3. And for the second denominator to divide it, we need a 5 times c minus 3. We already have the c minus 3, so we need to include the factor of 5. So multiplying these coefficients, 4 times 5 is 20 times c minus 3. Fractions whose denominators are x minus 3, x plus 3, and x squared minus 9. The x minus 3 can't be factored any further, nor can the x plus 3. The x squared minus 9 is a difference of two squares, x minus 3 times x plus 3. So the LCD has to consist of the x minus 3 as a factor, the x plus 3 as a factor, and then the last denominator requires us to have the product of those two, which we already have included. And so that would be the least common denominator, x minus 3 times x plus 3. And lastly, the fractions with denominators of a squared minus a minus 2 and a squared minus 4. So we factor a squared minus a minus 2, and that factors as a minus 2 times a plus 1. Right, we need the difference, or the factors of 2 whose difference is 1. And then a squared minus 4 is the difference of squares. The product of conjugates, that would be a minus 2 times a plus 2. So the LCD consists of both factors a minus 2 times a plus 1. And from the second denominator, we need an a minus 2, which we already have. We also need to include the factor of a plus 2.